Your Majesty, someone might see us. Haoxuan bit my neck and licked it, his sharp teeth stained with blood. Sated, he said, "Are you afraid that others will see me being intimate with you, Grand Tutor Fu?" "Stop!" I resisted, but he pressed further, slipping his hand into my clothes. "Grand Tutor, why is your body shaking so much? You can't even hold a pen." My face flushed, I couldn't speak. Ding! Royal Story reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. In the serene courtyard bathed in moonlight, the residence was eerily quiet. I was held in Haoxuan's embrace, the hand holding the brush trembling slightly. His sharp teeth grazed my neck, and he asked in a low, husky voice, "Grand Tutor, why did you stop writing? How could I continue writing in such circumstances? Aren't you done yet?" The sharp fangs pressed against my skin but didn't pierce through. Today was the night of the full moon, a night on which, every month, he needed my fresh blood as medicine. In other words, I was Haoxuan's antidote. Only the two of us knew this secret. On every full moon night, he would transform into a greedy wolf, demanding without satisfaction. This was such a moment. He loved to torment me, never giving me a moment's reprieve. I had suggested drawing the blood into a container, but he had playfully replied, "The Grand Tutor's blood, of course, tastes best taken directly." This emperor was indeed undisciplined. If it weren't for the gratitude of the late emperor, who repeatedly requested that the Fu family take the role of tutoring Haoxuan, I wouldn't have been entangled with this mischievous young man. But once in this role, there was no stepping down. Now, with internal factions and conspiracies, even though Haoxuan had the nation at heart, it was difficult for him to resist alone. Thus, my Fu family became his staunch supporters. But I hadn't anticipated being used as his antidote, uncovering his indescribable secret. The first time I encountered his condition was in his youth. That night, I had just woken up and, hearing unusual sounds from his room, went in to check. Unexpectedly, I saw his sharp fangs and blood-red eyes. Like a ravenous wolf, he pounced on me, piercing my neck without hesitation and sucking my blood. At that moment, I realized he wasn't an ordinary person. He was a monster. If word got out that the current crown prince was a blood-sucking monster, wouldn't the entire country be thrown into chaos? When he woke the next morning, his eyes were full of regret. He swore to study diligently and obey me in all things. We kept this secret for 8 years, until he ascended the throne and was revered by thousands. And I became the country's grand tutor, assisting him. But I hadn't expected that as he grew older, he would change. No longer the obedient child he used to be. It was as if he had torn away his old facade, making me increasingly exasperated. Nowadays, he had learned some mischievous tricks from somewhere, no longer respecting me as his tutor. Grand Tutor, focus. A sharp pain seared my neck as Haoxuan finally bit through the barrier, beginning his main course. Afterwards, I lay exhausted in his arms, his black and red dragon robe scented with dragon saliva, tinged with a faint smell of blood. "Has it stained your clothes?" It hadn't usually smelled like blood. You wasn't obedient today. You dare to push me too far." I drew out a ruler from my sleeve, ready to strike him. However, he merely chuckled, knowing I couldn't bring myself to hurt him, his long fingers gripping my wrist. The next second, he used the ruler to strike himself hard. "What are you doing?" "I upset the Grand Tutor, naturally. I should accept your punishment." Over these years filled with bloodshed, it was the first time I'd ever seen someone so foolish as to self-inflict for my sake. He knew my heart ached for him, exploiting my compassion over and over. Indeed, I did feel for him. Haoxuan hadn't had an easy journey, walking a path paved with lives. As a child, his mother was unloved, abducted by the noble consort and abandoned outside the palace. After 3 years, she was found and brought back to the palace. Barely days after her return to the palace, she froze to death in the cold palace, making him a despised, vilified figure. No one acknowledged him as a prince, claiming he was a sinister star who brought death to his mother. The maids assigned to care for him met with continuous accidents, further cementing his cursed reputation. Until the emperor's sons all died for no reason, and when everyone was pointing the finger at Haoxuan, the Zhou family's rebellion failed, and the rebellious noble consort finally showed her cards. She had orchestrated everything, framing him as the sinister star to kill everyone through him. Thus, Haoxuan was left as the emperor's only legitimate son. He walked a perilous path of blood and defamation to reach us. The late emperor asked the Fu family to mentor him, and seeing the prior events, no one in the Fu family dared to accept. I, unable to bear it, volunteered, leading to our deep connection. Haoxuan, do you know what this counts as? I lay in his arms, my voice weak. Counts as what? Haoxuan raised his voice, not really caring. Immoral and disgraceful. I scolded, but he remained unruffled, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Then let it be immoral and disgraceful. In the court, ministers, as if planned, successively knelt. I held my writing board, uncertain whether to kneel. Your subject boldly requests your Majesty to expand the harem and propagate heirs. They were pressuring Haoxuan. Ever since Haoxuan ascended the throne, he had treated the harem as mere ornaments. He would occasionally make an appearance here and there, but he never favored any of the concubines. It was the emperor's duty to produce heirs. After all, the throne couldn't go without a successor. I braced myself and knelt down, reciting the line, "Your subject boldly requests your Majesty to expand the harem and propagate heirs." This was Haoxuan's unavoidable fate. Above, a lazy inquiry came, "Does Grand Tutor Fu feel the same?" The tone was light, but it sent chills down one's spine. Yes. Haoxuan lowered his eyes, lost in thought. Since Grand Tutor Fu feels the same, then I will consider it seriously. Dismissed. Long live your Majesty. As I was about to turn and leave, Eunuch Wu called me back. His Majesty requests your presence. Being summoned by him, it was surely no good. When I arrived at the study, Haoxuan had already changed out of his dragon robe. Clad in simple blue attire, he sat there, focusing on his drawing with lowered eyes. "Come here," I responded and walked over, glancing at the draft paper on the desk. He seemed to notice and put away the painting. He looked up at me, his voice neutral, betraying no emotion. "With no one else here, do you truly wish for me to expand the harem and produce heirs?" He gazed at me silently, awaiting my response. "Your Majesty, as the Son of Heaven, it is your duty to have offspring and ensure the continuity of the throne." I answered slowly, looking at the floor. "Fu Jingxin, is this truly what you think?" "Yes." I lowered my head to avoid his eyes. In the next second, the world spun, and I was pressed against the desk. Haoxuan's eyes were bloodshot as he looked at me. "Look me in the eyes, and say it again." Gasping for breath, he seemed like an enraged beast, yet deep down he was waiting for my answer. But I couldn't give him the answer he hoped for. "I hope your Majesty produces offspring and," cough, "expands the harem." As soon as my words fell, Haoxuan let go of me. "In that case, so it shall be as Grand Tutor desires." But in the next moment, he untied my belt. His warm fingers brushed against me, lightly touching my abdomen. His eyes showed a hint of madness as he looked at me, speaking each word clearly. "What do you think would happen if this place bore my child?" His fingertips slowly moved upward, leaving my skin burning wherever he touched. Curling up like a boiled shrimp, my entire body flushed, my voice hoarse. "Your Majesty, please spare me." Hearing this, he stopped his movements, his eyes seemingly regaining clarity. "All right, I'll spare you." It seemed as if Haoxuan and I had fallen into an endless cold war. Since that day, for a month, apart from court sessions, we hadn't met privately, as if both of us were sulking and neither of us willing to back down. Tonight was another full moon. I waited for him at our usual spot, but he never came. I listened to the sound of bamboo leaves rustling in the side room all night. The full moon was obscured by thick fog halfway through the night. The person I waited for never came. The next day, news spread that the morning court session was canceled. The officials held their boards, whispering, "What's wrong with His Majesty? He has never missed a morning court. Is his body unwell? Could the situation have changed?" The murmuring voices crept into my ears, and I couldn't help but raise my voice. "Do you all wish to die?" They immediately fell silent. The first to break was me. I sought out Eunuch Wu. Eunuch Wu shook his head at me, holding his duster. "His Majesty says he will not see anyone." I pushed him aside and rashly barged into his palace for the first time. As soon as I stepped in, A blade was pressed against my neck, a guard's cold voice. His Majesty commanded that no one is allowed inside. I yelled towards the inside, Haoxuan, are you trying to kill yourself? Let me in. I don't know how long we remained in a standoff. When I finally forced my way in, my neck was cut, and the smell of blood filled the air. At last, I heard Haoxuan's voice. Let him in. The grand doors were shut heavily, the bedroom lit by a single candle, casting a dim glow. As I took a step closer to the bed, I was suddenly embraced from behind, by cold skin pressed against me. Fangs grazed my neck, bringing bouts of numbness. Warmth spread as he used his tongue to lick the blood from the wound. Ugh! He pierced the skin at the back of my neck again, adding another scar to the old one. With the alternating pain and numbness, I gradually lost myself. He relentlessly pulled open my robe. Enough! Enough! I pushed him away, lying back in his arms, watching as his blood-red eyes slowly returned to normal. He gently brushed my damp hair aside, his voice hoarse and tender. Grand Tutor, you still have a soft heart for me. Looking into his affectionate eyes, I closed mine. The date of my marriage to Yang Lu was set for August 12th, the day I first met him. In the hall, I held my board and requested, I and the daughter of the Yang family are in love with each other. I hope your Majesty will grant us the marriage. For the first time, Haoxuan lost his temper in court, slamming the memorial to the ground. Say that again. His fingertips trembled. And how could I not be the same? Everyone, get out. Grand Tutor Fu, stay. I looked up in shock, unable to believe my ears. This was the first time he was angry in court, a major taboo for an emperor. Step by step, he walked towards me, his tall figure enveloping me entirely as he cornered me. I looked into his eyes, pressed by his presence. Grand Tutor, must you anger me so? Haoxuan, the ill-fated bond between us should come to an end. I panted, my body trembling slightly. He approached closer, warm breaths grazing the back of my neck. Grand Tutor, what are you afraid of? I, as an emperor, still have my limits. The next second, sharp fangs pierced in, the sting spreading through me as my body curled up, clutching at the fabric around his waist. He held my waist, whispering in my ear. But only here, boundaries are lost with the Grand Tutor. You, Grand Tutor, call me Haoxuan. Are you to be married? To the daughter of the Yang family? Then let's see, between her and me, who pleases you more. The next second, pain shot through my lips as warmth forced its way in. Haoxuan, a sharp pain on my tongue. He held my throat and spoke slowly. What did I say you should call me? He pried open my mouth and forced white powder inside. What are you doing to me? What do you think, Grand Tutor? My body gradually grew strange, unnaturally heating up. Aphrodisiac. Haoxuan, don't make me hate you. He gripped my waist, suddenly kissing down gently. Hate me then. The Grand Tutor is to be someone else's husband. What do I have left to fear? The first wave of pain came. My nails dug into his back. I groaned. The night lingered long. The bed curtains swayed, juxtaposed with flickering candlelight. It was like a wedding night. Waking up, Haoxuan was already gone, my whole body covered in bruises and aches. I straightened myself, opened the door, and the light pierced my eyes, making me squint. A maid hurried over with a food box. Grand Tutor, you're awake. His Majesty ordered us to prepare food for you. I opened the food box. Inside were my favorite dragon well pastries. I sat there, taking small bites in a daze. Coco suddenly spoke out. His Majesty also asked me to tell you he has departed. Do not worry. My fingers paused. What did you say? His Majesty has gone to the northwest. I immediately stood and rushed out. Coco chased after me, urgently pulling me. Grand Tutor, you can't leave. If you leave, the court will fall into chaos. Yes, if I leave now, in this already leaderless situation, things will go from bad to worse. I frowned, cold sweat covering my palms. Haoxuan was blatantly leaving everything to me. 3 days later, I received his letter, filled with teasing, and not a single serious word. Between the lines, he inquired about that night. In the end, he left a note. Don't let me hear about the Grand Tutor's marriage. What if I die of heartbreak on the battlefield? So my marriage with the Yang family's daughter had to be delayed again. I couldn't stand it any longer. Before the Northwest campaign ended, I boarded a carriage to the Northwest, for no other reason than the approaching full moon night. If he couldn't return to the palace in time, his beastly nature might emerge, causing unpredictable consequences. After a bumpy journey, we finally arrived at the Northwest. We arrived quietly. I sneaked into Haoxuan's army tent under the cover of night. I entered and looked around, finding no one inside. About to leave, a cold blade pressed against my neck. "Who are you?" "It's me." The blade clattered to the ground. Haoxuan embraced me tightly from behind, as if to merge me into his body. "Haoxuan, let go of me first." He didn't move, rubbing his face against my neck. "Did you miss me?" Blushing and short of breath, I replied, "No." My earlobe was lightly nibbled. He grasped my wrist. "Stubborn. The Grand Tutor behaved and didn't marry. Always be this obedient. Understood? Haoxuan, this is insubordination. I am your tutor." Haoxuan licked my neck and slowly moved upward. "Then tonight, you will be on top?" He released me, leisurely looking at me. "Oh, Grand Tutor, you haven't taught me poetry in a long time. Can you teach me tonight?" Step by step, he pushed me towards the desk, and I ended up sitting on it, my hands pressed against his chest, questioning. "What do you intend to do?" He slowly twirled my hair, whispering softly, "What do you think, Grand Tutor?" He pressed me down onto the desk, reminding me of that absurd night. He untied my sash, and hurried footsteps sounded outside. In an instant, Haoxuan hid me under the desk. "Your Majesty, bad news, we lack provisions. We can't hold out for 10 days. The soldier reported quickly, fear in his voice. "Then march ahead of schedule." "But." "No buts." I stayed silent under the desk. Indeed, attacking early was the only way to salvage the situation. At this point, we had no choice but to take a gamble. The footsteps faded away, and silence returned to the tent. I peeked out from under the table curtain and saw Haoxuan looking at me with a meaningful gaze, and only then did I realize something was wrong. This posture was truly too suggestive. He lifted my chin, his voice hoarse. "Do you know how alluring you are?" I blushed and forcefully pushed his hand away. "Maintain respect and propriety." Haoxuan sneered and pulled me into his arms with great strength. He lowered his head closer to me and said slowly, "As the emperor of this country, should the Grand Tutor not obey my every word?" "Shut up." I covered his mouth, unwilling to let him continue. Reasoning with him was pointless. His mind was filled with indecent thoughts. After a while, he calmed down, his eyes returning to tranquility. "Fu Jingxin, are you aware of the consequences of acting on your own?" "Of course I know. Leaving the palace without permission and neglecting one's duties was a capital offense. If I didn't come, you would have died, wouldn't you? Tomorrow night is the full moon." A sudden hint of amusement appeared in Haoxuan's eyes. "Are you worried about me, Grand Tutor?" A cold wind extinguished the red candle. Outside came the sound of light footsteps. "Who is it?" I ran to push open the window, only seeing a fleeting shadow. My lower back was hugged and Haoxuan's gentle and strong voice reassured me, "Don't worry. Tomorrow there was an important battle, a life and death struggle at the ford of the river." I listened to his steady breathing all night and could not sleep. "Why are you dawdling? Help me get dressed." The sky had not yet lightened, but Haoxuan was already preparing. I took the cloak from the rack and draped it over his shoulders. In a low voice, I said to him, "Come back safely." He suddenly hugged me tightly. "I promised you, I won't let you down." Since childhood, he had never broken a promise to me. He promised to be a good emperor, and he achieved it. I clenched my robe's hem but still couldn't bring myself to hug him back. Watching his figure disappear into the snowy distance, I suddenly thought, how wonderful it would be if he were not an emperor. I shook my head and smiled at his back. What was I thinking? Back in the military tent, I was restless, a bad feeling gnawing at my heart, until a servant rushed in panic. "Something terrible has happened. The Northern Army attacked. We're short on soldiers. His Majesty is trapped in the dense forest." Without a moment's delay, I mounted a black horse. Along the way, I considered many possibilities only to discard them. Haoxuan had always been lucky and would surely be fine. When I finally found him in the dense forest, he was covered in blood. Haoxuan. I knelt beside him in a panic to check his breathing. Thankfully, he was still alive. He slowly opened his eyes and still had the strength to tease. "Are you worried?" Needless to say, my eyes must have reddened at this point. I carefully examined his wounds, realizing it was all someone else's blood. This rascal had been resting. How could you have someone report false military information? The next second I realized it was his trap. A plan to lure the enemy away from headquarters. "What will you do next?" The yellow sand billowed. We were driven to a dead end. Enemy cavalry surrounded us. Hao shouted arrogantly. Haoxuan, your head is mine now. Clenching my teeth, Haoxuan remained calm and collected. "Do as you please." His indifferent words enraged the adversary. "What do you mean? I was going to kill you a few days later. Seems like you're in a hurry to meet death." Hao brandished his spear, charging straight at us. Haoxuan held my waist and pulled me backward. "Watch out." As I embraced him, the spear grazed my shoulder. The sharp pain sent us plummeting into the depths of the cliff. Haoxuan, frowning, held me tightly. At this moment, consciousness faded. The wound on my left shoulder still hurt, threatening to render me unconscious. We landed on a pre-prepared fishing net, and he took me into a cavern. "Why did you have to be the hero? Blocking the spear meant for me." Weakly, I replied, "Your Majesty's body is precious." He turned me to face him and said seriously, "In my eyes, you don't need to observe such formalities. Just remember, you're Fu Jingxin, and I'm Haoxuan. That's enough." It was the first time he had spoken to me so seriously, seemingly genuinely angry. "I got it, Your Majesty, don't be angry." Haoxuan was always easy to appease. Hearing my words, his brows relaxed slightly. The campfire crackled, and wood snapped. Leaning against him, it was the first time the atmosphere between us had felt so peaceful. If only it could last forever. I slowly fell into sleep, waking up late at night to the howl of wolves from a distant hill. Opening my eyes, I saw his cloak draped over me. Struggling to prop myself up, I found Haoxuan curled in a corner of the cave, his body covered in fur. "Haoxuan, don't come closer." His voice was terribly hoarse, yet I stubbornly approached. "I told you not to come closer. Didn't you hear? Are you not afraid of me?" He flared his fur and glared fiercely at me. Ignoring his words, I continued to move towards him. "Do you want to push me away, Haoxuan?" I sighed. How had I forgotten tonight was the full moon? I offered my neck to him. "Bite. I can take it." His eyes, reddened with pain, hesitated. "Leave." I was stunned for a moment, scared by his appearance. "Haoxuan, what's wrong with you? Stay away from me." The desire in his eyes overflowed like madness, but his remaining rationality was still suppressing it. I saw his abnormality and didn't leave. Instead, I got closer. He seemed to be losing the battle and said intermittently, "You still have injuries, so it was because of this." "Haoxuan, how can you be so good to me?" He suppressed himself, trembling all over, pushing me away again and again, yet his body was madly craving. I looked at him for a long time, cupping his face and kissing him before he could react. This was my first act of initiative. I pried open his teeth and without hesitation, bit my tongue. Almost instantly, he took the lead, holding the back of my neck, drawing my tongue's blood until his consciousness slowly returned, with both of us leaning against the rock wall. Before passing out, I vaguely heard him say, "Grand Tutor, what should I do with you?" The next morning, when I opened my eyes, I saw his arched brows. "Can you get up, Grand Tutor?" He approached me, wanting to embrace my waist, but I avoided him. "I can do it myself." Perhaps my voice was too cold. I hadn't taken 2 steps before my wrist was grabbed. "Fu Jingxin, what do you really mean? You clearly care about me yet act so indifferent." He looked into my eyes and said word by word, while all I could do was evade. We were at a standoff for a long time before I finally spoke slowly. "Your Majesty, because you are the Emperor. Then what about what you did to me last night? You kissed me first." His tone was agitated, with even the corners of his eyes turning red. "Your Majesty, because you must not die. I am merely your antidote, not daring to wish for anything else. If I weren't the Emperor, Would those worldly prejudices not bind us? His eyes carried a hint of madness, as if he were ready to abandon the throne at any moment. I calmly said to him, "There are no ifs, Haoxuan. The emperor can only be you. But have any of you ever asked if I really want to be the emperor?" Under the moonlight, looking at his profile, I could see a hint of desolation. But between us, there was never a possibility. I watched as his hand slowly dropped. Then he let out a cold snort. "Fu Jingxin, I misjudged you." The army returned victorious. Haoxuan's strategy succeeded, annihilating the enemy forces, returning triumphantly. But on the carriage ride back, none of us could be happy. After returning to the palace, Haoxuan didn't seek me out again. Except on the night of the full moon, he would appear in my courtyard, biting my neck and repeatedly asking, "Grand Tutor, as long as you say you love me, I will forgive you." My answers were always negative. I looked at the full moon in the sky, tears slipping from the corners of my eyes. I have my helplessness too. The moon waxes and wanes, something ancient and difficult to make perfect. A drunken Haoxuan seemed to notice my tears, softly kissing the corners of my eyes. "Grand Tutor, don't cry. It breaks my heart." Love seems so contradictory, wildly possessing me on one side, tenderly kissing away my tears on the other. Which one is the real him? But both of him love me. I understand it all. The northern wars were settled, and the whole clan recuperated. The emperor was no exception. But lately, the news about Haoxuan kept reaching my ears. Fu Siyuan, carrying a plate of melon seeds, came to gossip. "I heard His Majesty has taken a liking to Mr. Yang from the moonlit pavilion, spending all day listening to him play the qin. Is it true?" Frowning, I replied, "I don't know. Aren't you His Majesty's closest Grand Tutor? How could you not know?" I picked up a book and hit his head with it. "Haven't you finished reading your books? So idle. Wait until I tell Big Brother." "Hey, don't say that. I'll go now." Watching Fu Siyuan disappear, I dared to show my true feelings. How could I not know? This wasn't the first time I had heard the news. Miss Yang's marriage could not be delayed. I should not delay a girl's prospects. So it was set for the 6th day of this month. I didn't expect Haoxuan to be there on the day of discussing the marriage. It turns out the Mr. Yang he loved recently was actually Yang Lu's brother. Going to the moonlit pavilion to play the qin was just for fun. As soon as I entered, I saw Haoxuan and Yang Han talking and laughing, as if I were the intruder. "Grand Tutor Fu, you're here. Please sit." Yang Han was truly as handsome as the rumors, clearly a man, yet with a touch of femininity, possessing a blend of strength and gentleness. Standing with Haoxuan, they looked well-matched. Yang Lu also appeared. She and Yang Han shared a 7-point resemblance. She walked toward us slowly, her gaze shy when she looked at me. "Mr. Fu, why are you here?" "I am here to discuss the marriage." Yang Lu was stunned. It seemed her mother hadn't told her in advance. The Yang family was hospitable, bringing out several jars of fine wine. We drank and discussed the wedding details. Yang Lu drank until her cheeks were flushed, excitedly talking about what kind of gold hairpins and wedding shoes she wanted. I half-heartedly agreed, my eyes landing on Haoxuan. At this moment, Yang Han was also heavily drunk, raising his glass to Haoxuan's mouth. Unwilling to be outdone, I watched them flirt and drank cup after cup myself. Until all 4 of us were drunk, Yang Lu and Yang Han were carried into the house. Just as a servant was about to support me, I heard someone in front say, "I'll take care of the Grand Tutor." The pavilion quieted down with just the 2 of us remaining. I gazed at him with misty eyes, looking for a long time as if I wanted to etch him into my heart. How could I never tire of this face, having looked at it for so many years? Haoxuan poured another glass of wine and brought it to me. "Are you drunk? What's your relationship with Yang Han?" I asked, seizing the drunken moment. I noticed no ripple of emotion in his eyes, his fingertips curling slightly. Then I heard his calm tone. "What does that have to do with you? Aren't you happiest seeing me with someone else? Anyone but you is fine." I shook my head. "No, it's not like that." It seemed he didn't believe me, as he poured himself another drink. "Does the Grand Tutor want to be like Yang Han? To enjoy my favor as my consort?" At this, I angrily stood up. "You, what did you do with him?" He laughed, a spring breeze passing by, making me dazed. Only one thought lingered in my mind. He had got what he wanted. So, you admit it? Admit caring about me? Admit being fond of me? He stepped closer and cornered me. Grand Tutor, I want to hear it from your own mouth. Clenching the hem of my clothes, for the first time in years, I felt at a loss. Mistakes are mistakes. Life is only 30,000 days. Why not live freely? For the first time, I let down all my defenses and confessed, broken. Yes, and so what? We never would and couldn't be together. I suddenly sobered up, thinking it had been just a dream, pushing him away in a rushed escape. Haoxuan stood in place, looking at his empty palm, then suddenly laughed. My marriage to the lady of the Yang family proceeded as planned. For the first time, I donned my wedding attire, standing at the Fu residence gate, waiting for my future wife. Haoxuan seemed to purposefully make it grandiose, but to me it felt like mockery. Watching Yang Lu hold the round fan, step by step, approach me, I felt no joy. The wedding ceremony completed, life was just like that. Any further desires were extravagant. As I crossed the threshold, I glanced back. I didn't see the familiar figure. Suddenly, my heart felt empty. At the banquet, I inexplicably drank far more than usual. Even Fu Siyuan came to me, asking, "Brother, aren't you happy? Today's your big day." Happy? How could I not be happy? I replied wryly, murmuring, "Siyuan, did I make a mistake? Brother, do you have someone in your heart? Whatever you decide, I support you. It's not too late to turn back now." I shook my head. It's too late. Everything is too late. It was midnight before I entered the bridal chamber. The figure on the bed was still waiting for me. A strange sense of guilt arose. From now on, she would be my wife, and I should treat her well. "Sorry, I'm late." She said nothing, still quietly sitting there. "The hair crown must be heavy. Let me help you take it off." I walked over and lifted her red veil, only to find that familiar face beneath. Haoxuan's eyes curved with a smile. "Fu Jingxin, you really made me wait. How could it be you? Why couldn't it be me?" Haoxuan wore wedding attire too, the red robe making him look even more handsome. My ears reddened, knowing full well his intent. I said, "We are impossible. Where is Yang Lu? Where did she go?" Haoxuan stood and cornered me again, his gaze lingering on my lips. "She went to her lover." "If Yang Lu had the courage, why is our grand tutor so timid?" he whispered, causing my heart to flutter. "You." The day the grand tutor admitted it, "I never planned to let you go. I'll bear the worldly prejudices for you, Fu Jingxin, as long as you stand by my side. Just stay with me." His voice softened, and I suddenly felt that those feudal conventions weren't so terrifying. I knew I had been running away, only to find myself falling into his emotional trap unknowingly. He always had the ability to entice, but somehow I felt different. I had been too selfish, considering the future without realizing that the most important thing was us. Is love worth facing all the difficulties? Perhaps it is, and he would give me a satisfactory answer. Haoxuan, can I trust you?" I uttered this sentence without noticing the tremble in my own voice. "This is my answer." He placed a dagger, one that had saved his life several times, into my hand. Now he entrusted it to me. "Fu Jingxin, if I ever betray you, use this dagger to kill me. But you know that will never happen." He spoke each word clearly, and I looked into his eyes, knowing he wasn't lying. "Then I will trust you." As soon as I said this, my ears began to burn, and even the wedding garment in front of me felt scorching to my eyes. The atmosphere turned intimately warm as he gently pulled me into his embrace, stroking the back of my neck. It felt like the first time we truly understood each other. "Have you made up your mind, Fu Jingxin? There's no turning back." "Yes, I've made up my mind. From now on, we will face the world's joys and sorrows together." I buried myself in his chest, letting him untie my sash. The red curtains swayed, and the crabapple blossoms opened their petals under the moonlight. "Fu Jingxin, I'm going to overstep my bounds. Do you agree?" "Yes, I agree," I replied sporadically, losing consciousness. Looking into his eyes, I caressed his cheek. "From now on, we will share our pains and pleasures." Epilogue. We indulged in reckless passion for a long time until Prime Minister Lu discovered our relationship. It wasn't as difficult as I had imagined. After all, rumors of forbidden love weren't unheard of. People did look at us with curiosity, but I didn't mind. Fu Siyuan whispered meaningfully in my ear. Brother, so your beloved was hidden so deeply. As long as Haoxuan's monstrous nature remained concealed, everything else would be fine. In spring, we moved away from the court and bought a small courtyard in the suburbs. During the day, I read books at the desk while Haoxuan painted, as seriously as he did before. I couldn't resist asking, "What were you painting back then?" "You." I was taken aback. "What do you mean?" He spread out the paper on the table, revealing an image of me holding an umbrella. It was on a snowy day. I was wearing a cloak and walking towards the shivering him in the corner with an oil paper umbrella. My voice was gentle. The future emperor should show some courage. Any courage that followed was likely spent on me. I couldn't help but laugh, being pulled into Haoxuan's embrace. The peach blossoms outside fell into the house with the spring breeze. His voice was tender. "Would you like to grow old with me?" "Only if you live long and well, year after year." Haoxuan's perspective. My life wasn't smooth sailing, it was rather chaotic. Fortunately, the ending was good, for I met him. The first time I saw him was on a snowy day. I had just been expelled from the palace, trembling in a corner, until he appeared in front of me in official robes. I recognized him immediately. He was the famous Lord Fu, holding an oil paper umbrella, looking exactly like people said, with a face that could charm anyone. He held the umbrella over my head and his voice was gentle. The future emperor should show some courage. One sentence changed my life. I promised him to be a good emperor, and I also promised to live well. For the past 10 years, I bore my terrifying ailment alone. I didn't know why I had turned into a monster. But he wasn't afraid. For the first time, I saw compassion on someone's face. And the object of that compassion was me. It felt as if someone truly stood by my side. But it seemed I couldn't leave him. I started to lose sight of my feelings towards him. It felt like unfounded possession, mixed with uncontrollable dependence. Until he joined those who forced me to extend my lineage, my psychological defenses finally crumbled. The feelings I had carefully hidden were laid bare, along with explanations for my previous mischief. I love Fu Jingxin even though he is a man. I love him, and it's something I will never go against. Knowing he cared about me that night, I stayed awake all night. I knew my grand tutor loved me the most. He would hold an umbrella for me in my most helpless moments. He would endure pain to be my antidote on a full moon night. Only my grand tutor loved me the most. He didn't want me to hurt. I wish to grow old with him, but he wishes for me to have a long and peaceful life. But he doesn't know I made this wish the moment we first met.